The Grand Concert Hall in New York City was buzzing with anticipation. The audience, dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns, whispered with excitement as the world-renowned pianist Leonardo Vescari was about to perform. His reputation for brilliance was only rivaled by his arrogance. Known for his sharp tongue and theatrical flair, Leonardo often toyed with his audience. Tonight, among the crowd, sat a woman out of place. Clara Thompson, a waitress from rural Pennsylvania, wore a simple floral dress and old sneakers. She hadn't meant to come, but a last-minute ticket gifted by a friend brought her here. Clara had never seen a grand piano up close before, much less in the hands of a virtuoso. Her eyes widened at the sheer size of the Steinway on stage, its black lacquered surface gleaming under the lights. She sat in the last row, clutching her small purse with both hands. The concert had barely begun when Leonardo stopped. Abruptly, during his third piece, frowned at a smudged key and turned toward the crowd with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "I wonder," he said in a crisp European accent, "if anyone in the audience could do better tonight." Laughter scattered through the hall. Some thought it was part of the act, a signature trick of Leonardo's unpredictable performances. But when he stepped down and strolled toward the back row, the crowd fell silent. He scanned the seats and, for reasons no one could explain, stopped in front of Clara. "You, madam," he said, with a sly smile, "you look like you could use a moment in the spotlight. Care to try?" Clara's eyes widened, heart thundering in her chest. She shook her head, but he was already holding out his hand. There was no malice in his tone, just mockery disguised as charm. The audience chuckled, expecting nothing more than an awkward few notes and a quick retreat. Clara hesitated, then stood slowly, unsure why she accepted. Maybe it was the memory of her mother's old piano back home, the one she used to tinker with before life took over. Maybe it was the quiet defiance rising in her chest. She took Leonardo's hand and let him lead her down the aisle, each step echoing louder than the last in the hushed auditorium. Leonardo bowed grandly and gestured for her to sit. Clara smoothed her dress and stared at the keys. Her fingers hovered for a moment before touching down gently. She closed her eyes, and then she began. The first few notes were uncertain, but soon a melody emerged, haunting, warm, and unmistakably heartfelt. It wasn't a classical masterpiece or a showy sonata. It was a lullaby, the kind mothers hum to their babies, a tune shaped by memory, not by theory. The room was frozen. Even Leonardo stood still, his smirk replaced by a puzzled frown. Clara played as if the piano had waited years just for her touch. Her fingers, though untrained, danced with sincerity, guided not by skill but by soul. The crowd forgot to breathe. Each note was a story, every pause a whisper. When she finally lifted her hands, there was a silence so thick it could be cut with a knife. Then came the applause, hesitant at first, then thunderous. People rose from their seats, clapping with wide eyes and open mouths. Some even wiped away tears. Leonardo, stunned, stepped forward and bowed to Clara. Backstage, a swarm of reporters and guests tried to speak to her, but Clara politely slipped away. She wasn't used to attention and didn't seek it now. She found her way outside and began walking down the street alone, replaying the surreal experience in her mind. Behind her, Leonardo watched from a window, brows furrowed. He had played in Vienna, Paris, and Tokyo, but no performance had stirred the room the way Clara's lullaby had. For the first time he felt like a student, and for the first time he wanted to learn. The next morning, social media exploded. Clips from the concert had gone viral. "Mystery woman stuns Carnegie Hall." "Who is she?" Headlines were everywhere. Clara's phone rang non-stop, but she ignored the calls. She returned to her diner shift like nothing had happened. Customers whispered, recognizing her from the video. Her boss offered her a raise and fewer night shifts. She smiled, but declined. She didn't want fame, just Peace. Meanwhile, Leonardo was already planning his next move. He had to find Clara again, not for ego, but for something else he hadn't felt in years: humility. Leonardo traveled to Pennsylvania, guided only by whispers and blurry screenshots. He arrived in Clara's small town and located the diner. When he walked in, conversations stopped. He approached the counter where Clara stood, refilling coffee cups. "May I speak with you?" he asked gently. Clara looked up, surprised, but not flustered. She led him outside, where they sat on a bench. "Why are you here?" she asked. Leonardo hesitated. "To apologize and to ask you to play again, with me on stage, not as a joke. You reminded me what music is supposed to feel like." Clara shook her head. "I don't belong in your world," Leonardo replied. "Then perhaps my world needs changing." He offered her a spot in his next tour. 3 cities, no pressure. Clara laughed softly, staring at her worn shoes. "I never even learned to read sheet music." Leonardo smiled. "All the more reason the world should hear you." After a long pause, she agreed, not for the stage or the glory, but for her mother, whose lullaby had never been heard beyond the walls of their farmhouse. Maybe now it could live on. As rehearsals began, Clara's nerves returned. She wasn't used to lights, cameras, or critics, but Leonardo never mocked her again. Instead, he listened, studied, and even changed some of his own arrangements to match her style. They played together, him with precision, her with passion. And it worked. Their first performance was in Chicago. When Clara walked on stage, the crowd erupted. She sat beside Leonardo and placed her fingers on the keys. The same lullaby echoed through the grand hall, but this time it was accompanied by violins, cello, and the quiet heartbeat of a grand piano. Backstage after the show, Clara wiped her eyes as people lined up to meet her. She hugged a young girl who said, "I want to play like you someday." That night, Clara didn't just share music, she shared courage. Her story reached beyond performance. It became a message. You don't need fame, wealth, or training to touch lives. You just need truth. And Clara's truth came wrapped in every humble note she played. As the tour continued, the world began to see something rare. A famous pianist transformed by a simple woman who played from the heart. Back in Pennsylvania, Clara's diner placed a framed photo of her and Leonardo on the wall. Customers pointed it out with pride. One day, a music foundation called, asking her to teach children who couldn't afford lessons. She agreed instantly. Clara never moved to the city. She kept her small home and quiet life. But her music traveled farther than she ever had. And Leonardo? He changed too. Gone with the theatrical tricks and the ego. He played with grace. Now, each note a thank you to the woman who reminded him that music isn't about perfection. It's about connection. The final city of their short tour was Los Angeles. Clara stood backstage, clutching the edge of the curtain, listening to the roar of the crowd waiting outside. It was surreal. Just weeks ago, she had been serving pancakes in a diner, her world limited to small-town dreams. Now her music, simple and honest, had moved strangers across the country. Beside her, Leonardo adjusted his cufflinks, unusually quiet. He glanced at her with a soft smile, not of amusement, but respect. They shared no words. They had come to understand each other through music alone, their bond unspoken but deeply felt. Clara walked on stage, her steps steady despite the thousands of eyes watching her. The lights no longer blinded her. The weight of expectation no longer crushed her. She sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began. This time she didn't play the lullaby, she played something new, something she'd been creating in the quiet hours between rehearsals. It had no name. It was a conversation, a journey, a prayer. Leonardo listened, eyes closed, and when it was his turn, he joined in, not to outshine her, but to elevate her. They were equals now, not teacher and pupil. The audience stood as one when the final chord faded. Applause thundered through the auditorium. Clara bowed, blinking back. tears. She had never known what it meant to feel seen, truly seen, for who she was. Afterward, reporters swarmed again, but this time she wasn't afraid. She smiled, gave short answers, and slipped away early to breathe. Leonardo found her outside, and sitting on the edge of the stage steps beneath the stars. "You wrote that piece, didn't you?" he asked. She nodded. "What's it called?" Clara looked up and whispered, "Belonging." Leonardo said nothing more. He simply sat beside her in silence. The next morning, Clara returned to Pennsylvania. Her time in the spotlight had been beautiful, but she needed her roots. Fame was never her goal. In her town, she was still just Clara. She liked it that way. Still, the experience had changed her. She began giving free piano lessons to children using an old upright piano donated by a neighbor. She didn't teach notes. She taught feelings. "Play like you're telling a secret," she often said. The children listened wide-eyed, as if she carried magic in her hands. And in many ways she did. Her simplicity had become her strength. Meanwhile, Leonardo continued his career, but with a new mission. His performances became more intimate, more human. He stopped demanding perfection from his students and instead asked them, "Why do you play?" He often spoke of Clara on stage, not as a novelty, but as a muse. Invitations poured in for them to perform together again, but Clara declined most. She would agree only once a year during a concert held for underprivileged youth. She traveled to whatever city was hosting it, sit beside Leonardo and remind the world once more what untrained, honest music could do to a heart. Then came the invitation that neither expected. A major film studio reached out, offering to base a movie on Clara's story. She refused at first, thinking it unnecessary. But when the producer explained that part of the proceeds would fund music education in rural towns, she agreed. The film was made with care. Clara insisted that unknown actors play the lead roles so real people could relate. She consulted on the script and played the piano in the film herself. When it was released, it touched millions. Children across the country signed up for piano classes. Music stores saw a boom. Despite the attention, Clara stayed humble. One evening, while cleaning her tiny kitchen, she heard a knock. It was Leonardo carrying a leather folder. "What's that?" she asked. "Something I've been working on," he said. Inside were sheet music pages. Her lullaby, her composition Belonging, and other pieces they'd played together. "I want to publish these," he said, "under your name." Clara hesitated. "I never wrote them down," he smiled. "I did." She wept, touched that someone had cared enough to preserve what she had considered. Fleeting Moments. The collection was published as the Clara Suite, and it sold worldwide. Months passed and Clara continued teaching, her life quiet but rich. One day, she got a letter from a girl named Lila in Montana. "Dear Clara," it began, "I heard your song on YouTube and it helped me stop crying after my parents divorced. I started playing piano too. Someday I want to be just like you." Clara kept that letter by her bed. She had never won a Grammy or performed for royalty, but this was her greatest award. Her lullaby had traveled further than she ever imagined, cradling hearts in its soft melody just as it once had hers. Leonardo and Clara grew close, not romantically, but deeply. Their friendship was built on trust, mutual growth, and the strange magic of shared vulnerability. He visited her every Christmas, bringing her fresh Italian coffee and news from the music world. She always greeted him with homemade cookies and a walk through the snowy woods. They rarely spoke of the Carnegie Hall night. They didn't need to. It had marked them both, a silent chapter always glowing between their conversations. He often said, "That night I stopped performing and started feeling." And she would reply, "That night I remembered who I was." As the years passed, Clara's students grew. Some went to college, others formed small bands. One young boy, Noah, who had once stuttered through sentences, now played jazz in cafes, charming audiences with his confidence. He always credited Miss Clara with changing his life. When reporters visited hoping to profile her again, Clara politely declined. "The story's not mine anymore," she'd say. "It belongs to the kids now." And so it did. Her music had seeded a forest of voices, raw, imperfect human voices, each echoing what she once whispered through piano keys no one expected her to touch. Then one winter, Clara received news that Leonardo had fallen ill. She traveled to his home in Italy, where he rested in a villa overlooking a quiet lake. They spent his final weeks playing duets, talking of simple things, and drinking chamomile tea. One evening, he handed her an envelope. "Open it after," he said with a wink. Clara held his hand, kissed his forehead, and thanked him for believing in her when no one else did. He passed peacefully in his sleep. She cried not for the loss of a great pianist, but for the part of herself that had grown through him. The envelope contained a deed. Leonardo had willed his New York apartment to Clara. She never moved in. Instead, she turned it into a music center for underprivileged children, naming it the Second Chance Studio. Inside, framed on the wall, hung a photo of their first concert. Below it, a simple plaque read, "Where Soul Met." Sound. Donations flooded in. Young musicians came from all over the country to learn from Clara. She didn't charge a fee. She said, "Music is free if you let it live in you." Her studio became a haven, a home, a hope for many. Years later, Clara was invited to the White House to receive the Presidential Medal of Arts. She wore the same floral dress she'd worn that night at Carnegie Hall. During her speech, she said, "Music doesn't care where you're from. It only cares if you're honest. And the moment someone believes in your sound, that's when the world starts to listen." The hall erupted in applause. That night, her old town back in Pennsylvania held a watch party. Children huddled around a small TV in the diner where Clara once worked. They cheered like she was their hometown superhero. Clara never let the applause define her. She still woke up early, still drank cheap coffee, still walked barefoot in the grass behind her house. But she knew now that the small things, her mother's lullaby, the dusty piano, the unexpected dare at a concert, had led to something beautiful. She didn't seek the spotlight yet. Somehow it followed her. But in her heart, she remained that simple woman with calloused fingers, playing for no one but herself. And perhaps that's why everyone wanted to hear her, because in her quiet truth, people found their own voices echoing back. When Clara passed away at the age of 86, the world mourned her. Students lit candles across the country. Musicians performed her lullaby in subway stations, in schools, in churches, and on grand stages. The piece became a symbol of hope, a gentle reminder that talent isn't always trained, that greatness isn't always loud. On the anniversary of her first concert, Leonardo's great niece, now a pianist herself, performed Clara's music at Carnegie Hall. The audience wept, and above them, a single spotlight shone where Clara had once sat, reminding them all that even a whispered melody can outlast thunder. In her hometown, a statue was placed near the diner. It showed a young woman sitting at a piano, head bowed, fingers poised to play. The plaque read, "Clara Thompson, the heart behind the keys." Beneath it, children often left flowers, letters, and sometimes a single white key from broken keyboards, as if to say, "I believe too." Her story became more than a performance. It became a legacy, not because she was famous, but because she dared to be ordinary in a world that worshipped spectacle. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that the truest music begins within.